What if the Allied armada storming Normandy on June 6, 1944, met utter disaster, waves of landing craft shredded by German guns, beaches turned into killing fields, and the invasion repelled with catastrophic losses? As Rommel's Atlantic Wall holds firm and reinforcements pour in, the Western Front remains locked, unleashing butterfly effects that prolong Hitler's Reich, embolden Stalin's advance, and reshape the war's endgame. No swift liberation of Europe, no race to Berlin. Instead, a desperate stalemate births a darker Cold War, where atomic shadows fall sooner and the cost of failure echoes through generations. Dive into this harrowing alternate timeline where one rainy dawn averts victory's dawn, but ignites humanity's longer nightmare. The morning of June 6, 1944, dawns under leaden skies and raging seas, conditions that, in this timeline, prove fatal to Operation Overlord. Historically, Eisenhower hesitated but proceeded despite marginal weather. Here, intelligence misreads Rommel's reinforcements, and persistent storms force a fatal decision: launch as planned. The Armada, over 5,000 vessels carrying 156,000 troops, steams toward Normandy amid force 6 winds and heavy swells. The point of divergence crystallizes on the beaches. Omaha sees catastrophe first. The 29th and 1st Infantry Divisions, already bloodied in training accidents, hit submerged obstacles and mines in churning surf. Duplex drive tanks, 34 of 32 launched from the 741st Tank Battalion, sink almost immediately in rougher-than-expected waves. Only 5 reach shore. German 352nd Division, fully alerted and at strength under Rommel's personal oversight, he never leaves for Germany, pours enfilading fire from reinforced bunkers. By noon, American casualties exceed 10,000, survivors huddle under cliffs, unable to advance. Utah fares little better. Mislandings scatter the 4th Division, strong currents and accurate coastal batteries shred follow-up waves. Gold, Juno, and Sword suffer under concentrated Panzer Lehr and 12th SS counterattacks. Rommel, present at the front, commits reserves immediately, unlike the historical delay. Hobart's funnies, vital for breaching obstacles, are lost in greater numbers to weather and mines. Airborne drops compound the disaster. The 82nd and 101st Airborne scatter across flooded Cotentin marshes, many paratroopers drown in deliberately inundated fields. Pathfinders fail in cloud cover, only 20% assemble coherently. By dawn, German counterattacks isolate pockets, capturing or destroying half the airborne force. Eisenhower, aboard USS Augusta, receives frantic reports by evening: no beachhead secured, follow-up waves repelled with heavy losses. Montgomery urges continuation, but Bradley and Ramsey warn of annihilation. On June 7, Eisenhower orders evacuation, the largest Dunkirk-scale retreat in history. Under Luftwaffe harassment, now concentrated without historical Allied air supremacy, remnants withdraw. Total Allied casualties surpass 80,000, over half the invasion force, while German losses remain under 10,000. The immediate aftermath reshapes the war. Hitler, triumphant, declares the miracle of Normandy, proof of final victory. Rommel is promoted Field Marshal, Atlantic Wall funding triples. The Western Allies retreat to Britain, their armies shattered, U.S. divisions gutted, Canadian and British formations decimated. Churchill's government survives a no-confidence vote by a thread. Roosevelt faces isolationist backlash as body bags return. Germany redirects forces eastward. 3 Panzer armies bolster Army Group Center before Bagration. The July 20th plot falters amid victory euphoria. Stauffenberg's bomb detonates but fails to kill Hitler in the celebratory atmosphere. The Holocaust accelerates unchecked. V-2s and jet fighters enter mass production earlier. Stalin, sensing Western weakness, accelerates offensives but faces reinforced German lines. The race for atomic weapons intensifies. American scientists, unburdened by European commitments, push the Manhattan Project harder. Yet without a second front, Soviet manpower bleeds against fortified positions. As summer 1944 ends, Europe remains firmly in Axis hands. The Allies regroup in Britain, planning desperate alternatives. Operation Unthinkable Whispers begin earlier. The war grinds toward a longer, bloodier conclusion, where failure at Normandy dooms swift liberation and invites atomic fire to break the deadlock. The butterfly effects cascade. a prolonged Reich, a vaster Iron Curtain, and a Cold War forged in nuclear ashes rather than conventional triumph. As summer 1944 ends, Europe remains firmly in Axis hands. The Allies regroup in Britain, planning desperate alternatives. Operation Unthinkable Whispers begin earlier. The war grinds toward a longer, bloodier conclusion, where failure at Normandy dooms swift liberation and invites atomic fire to break the deadlock. Germany capitalizes ruthlessly on the victory. Hitler redirects 15 divisions, 5 panzer armies, from the west to the east by August 1944. Army Group Center, historically shattered by Operation Bag Ration, stands reinforced with Tiger II heavies and fresh Volksgrenadier formations. The Soviet summer offensive stalls outside Warsaw. Zhukov's armies suffer 500,000 casualties in futile assaults against fortified lines. By autumn, German counterattacks recapture Minsk and push toward Smolensk. The Baltic states remain securely held. Courland pocket never forms. In the Mediterranean, Rommel, now Supreme Commander West, launches limited offensives. With no Normandy drain, Panzer Army Africa receives priority fuel and replacements. Tobruk falls again in October. Montgomery's 8th Army retreats to El Alamein. Malta surrenders after intensified siege in November. Italy, spared Anzio and Gothic Line attrition, holds the peninsula firmly. Mussolini's regime stabilizes with German support. The Atlantic becomes a graveyard. Without second front distraction, Donet's U-boats, now including Type XXI electroboats in numbers, devastate convoys. By early 1945, Britain imports drop below survival levels, rationing reaches 1,200 calories daily. Churchill falls in February 1945, Anthony Eden's government opens secret peace feelers through Sweden. Hitler, emboldened, demands return of pre-1914 colonies and naval parity, terms rejected, but armistice talks begin. The Pacific theater shifts dramatically. Roosevelt, facing domestic fury over Normandy, diverts resources eastward. The island-hopping campaign accelerates. Saipan falls in May 1945, Iwo Jima in January 1946. B-29s from Marianas bases begin firebombing Japan earlier and more intensely. Yet without European commitments, the Manhattan Project receives unlimited priority. The first atomic bomb detonates over Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, historically accurate date, but here followed by Nagasaki and a third device on Kokura when Japan hesitates. Japan surrenders unconditionally in September 1945. The Soviet Union, denied Manchurian entry, receives no Kurils or Sakhalin concessions. Stalin, furious at Western atomic monopoly, accelerates his own bomb program using captured German scientists. Europe's endgame arrives in 1946. With Japan defeated, Allied forces, now overwhelmingly American, launch Operation Eclipse, massive strategic bombing from British bases combined with amphibious landings in southern France and the Netherlands. German defenses, depleted by Eastern losses, crack under carpet bombing. V-weapons terrorize London until overrun factories silence them. Hitler, refusing evacuation from Berlin, dies in the Führerbunker during April 1946 street fighting, suicide or killed in crossfire. Unconditional surrender follows on May 8, 1946, exactly 1 year later than our timeline. The Red Army, having borne the war's heaviest burden, reaches the Rhine. Soviet occupation zones extend to include all Germany east of the Elbe, plus Austria and northern Italy. France receives only a narrow western strip. Britain, exhausted, accepts minimal zones. The Holocaust concludes with even higher toll, perhaps 8 million, as death marches and final gassings continue into 1946. Post-war conferences at Potsdam equivalent in 1946 reflect Soviet dominance. Stalin dictates terms: permanent demilitarization of Western Germany, massive reparations in machinery and labor. The United States, holding atomic monopoly until 1949, retreats into hemispheric defense. Truman's containment doctrine hardens earlier. NATO forms in 1947 with fewer, weaker members. The world settles into a colder, more lopsided Cold War, a vast Soviet bloc from the Elbe to Vladivostok facing a wary Anglo-American alliance across fortified Atlantic moats. Proxy wars ignite sooner in Greece, Iran, and Korea. The stage is set for decades of nuclear brinkmanship, where Normandy's failure costs not just a battle, but the shape of freedom's victory, and burdens humanity with an iron curtain drawn deeper and darker across the heart of Europe. The world settles into a colder, more lopsided Cold War, a vast Soviet bloc from the Elbe to Vladivostok facing a wary Anglo-American alliance across fortified Atlantic moats. Proxy wars ignite sooner in Greece, Iran, and Korea. The stage is set for decades of nuclear brinkmanship, where Normandy's failure costs not just a battle, but the shape of freedom's victory, and burdens humanity with an iron curtain drawn deeper and darker across the heart of Europe. The 1950s and 1960s unfold under Soviet hegemony in the East and fragile Western containment. The USSR, having borne 80% of the war's casualties and liberated most of Europe single-handedly, imposes people's democracies from Paris's eastern suburbs to Prague and Budapest. France's Communist Party, radicalized by prolonged occupation, joins a coalition government in 1947. By 1952, a Soviet-aligned People's Republic of France emerges after civil strife. Italy follows in 1950. A Greater Eurasian Socialist Union formalizes in 1955, integrating economies under Moscow's planning. Politically, the West retreats. Britain, bankrupted by prolonged war, grants Indian independence in 1948 amid chaos. The Raj fragments into warring states. Decolonization accelerates violently. Algerian War rages 1954 to 1964 under communist influence. Vietnam falls entirely to Ho Chi Minh in 1950. The United States, atomic monopolist until the Soviet test in 1948, a year earlier than historical, adopts Fortress America posture. NATO, formed in 1948, includes only Britain, Canada, Benelux, and Scandinavia, weak and defensive. Social consequences prove profound. Eastern Europe's populations endure Stalinist purges into the 1950s, millions more vanish in gulags. Western Europe, spared total destruction but occupied longer, sees collaboration trials claiming tens of thousands. Jewish survivors, fewer than historical due to extended camp operations, rebuild primarily in America and Palestine. Israel declares independence in 1948 amid Arab-Soviet backing, fighting a bloodier war resolved only by U.S. nuclear umbrella in 1956. Culturally, the delayed victory stifles optimism. No baby boom of historical scale, Europe's demographics stagnate under occupation scars. Women's roles expand in resistance networks but contract post-war under conservative or communist patriarchies. Rock and roll emerges subdued. Soviet-approved jazz dominates Eastern youth culture. Hollywood thrives in isolation, exporting escapism rather than triumph. Technology diverges sharply. Without European brain drain acceleration, Manhattan Project scientists focus on delivery systems. Intercontinental bombers fly by 1950, ICBMs by 1955. Soviet rocketry, enriched by more captured German talent, launches Sputnik in 1954. The space race intensifies, American lunar landing in 1965, Soviet in 1967. Nuclear proliferation begins earlier, Britain tests in 1950, France, pre-communist, in 1955. Atmospheric testing scars the planet, fallout awareness sparks environmental movements by the 1960s. Economically, the bipolar divide hardens. The West adopts mixed economies with heavy state intervention. Britain nationalizes industries wholesale. America's prosperity funds containment but breeds McCarthyism on steroids, isolationist sentiment lingers. Eastern planned economies achieve heavy industrialization but chronic shortages. Berlin, fully Soviet after 1948 wall construction, becomes propaganda showcase amid barbed wire. By the 1970s, détente emerges from exhaustion. Proxy wars, Korean stalemate 1951 to 1954, Cuban Missile Crisis equivalent in 1960 over Azores bases, nearly escalate to exchange. Brezhnev-era stagnation grips the East, Western youth protest Vietnam analogues in Africa. The oil crisis of 1973, engineered by Soviet-aligned Middle East, cripples Western economies while funding Eurasian arms. The long-term consequence is a more militarized, ideologically rigid world. Dissent in the East faces harsher repression, Hungarian revolt crushed in 1956 with chemical weapons. Western democracies tilt authoritarian under perpetual threat. Scientific collaboration stalls, computing advances slower without transatlantic exchange. The butterfly effects compound. Normandy's catastrophe not only prolongs the war but poisons the peace, birthing a 20th century where liberation's light dims earlier, and the struggle between freedom and control burns colder, longer, and closer to the brink. The long-term consequence is a more militarized, ideologically rigid world. Dissent in the East faces harsher repression. Hungarian revolt crushed in 1956 with chemical weapons. Western democracies tilt authoritarian under perpetual threat. Scientific collaboration stalls. Computing advances slower without transatlantic exchange. The butterfly effects compound. Normandy's catastrophe not only prolongs the war but poisons the peace, birthing a 20th century where liberation's light dims earlier, and the struggle between freedom and control burns colder, longer, and closer to the brink. The unraveling begins in the 1980s. Soviet overextension, proxy wars in Afghanistan equivalents, African client states, and massive military spending, strains the Eurasian bloc. Grain shortages recur, black markets thrive. Reformist voices emerge in Poland and Czechoslovakia by 1985, met with initial crackdowns but growing Western radio propaganda via Voice of America. The Chernobyl disaster analog in 1986, larger due to unchecked nuclear expansion, exposes systemic failures, sparking environmental protests across the bloc. Gorbachev-like reforms arrive late in 1989. Perestroika and glasnost unleash nationalism, Baltic republics declare sovereignty, Ukraine demands independence. Hardliners attempt a coup in 1991, but fragmented armies refuse orders. The Greater Eurasian Socialist Union dissolves by Christmas 1991, peacefully in Europe, violently in Yugoslavia and Central Asia. Russia emerges diminished, authoritarian under nationalist successors. China, never fully integrated, charts independent market reforms from 1992. The West, exhausted by containment costs, welcomes the collapse warily. NATO expands cautiously to former neutrals. A unified Germany, now fully democratic and Western-aligned, joins in 1995. The United States, holding nuclear superiority longer, pivots to Pacific containment against rising Asian powers. The European Union forms in 1993 as a loose economic bloc, integrating liberated eastern states gradually. In our present day of January 1, 2026, this alternate world stands paradoxically more fragmented yet less scarred by total war. Global population reaches 8 billion, lower than ours, spared prolonged conflicts disruptions. Europe thrives as a patchwork of democracies. Paris and Rome reclaim cultural primacy, Berlin a united capital of cautious optimism. Russia oscillates between democracy and strongman rule. A multipolar Asia features a democratic India, authoritarian China, and liberal Japan. Technology lags in consumer fields but leaps in defense. The Internet emerges in the late 1990s from military networks. Social media delays until the 2010s, tempering polarization. Space remains militarized. Orbital stations by 1985, lunar bases contested until 1990s treaties. Fusion power achieves commercial viability in 2015, earlier due to sustained Cold War investment. Climate accords bind globally in 1992 amid Chernobyl fallout fears. Carbon emissions peak in 2005, net zero projections hold for 2055. Socially, progress arrives unevenly. Women's rights surge post-collapse. Eastern Europe elects female leaders by the 2000s. LGBTQ acceptance spreads from Western holdouts in the 2010s. Yet Holocaust memory, deeper with extended atrocities, fuels stronger global human rights norms. Genocide prevention treaties in force earlier. Demographically, migration patterns invert. Millions flee former Eastern Bloc in the 1990s, revitalizing Western economies. Jewish cultural renaissance centers in New York and Tel Aviv, Israel, bolstered by earlier U.S. support, becomes regional superpower. One catastrophic morning in June 1944 spared no immediate lives but cost millions delayed, through prolonged occupation, deeper Soviet dominion, and atomic brinkmanship. D-Day's failure did not prevent Allied victory, only postponed it at terrible price, reshaping the Cold War into a more lopsided, nuclear-haunted standoff. The butterfly effect teaches that battlefield triumphs are fleeting. Their absence reshapes ideologies, borders, and souls for generations. A single storm's fury over Normandy turned history's greatest invasion into tragedy, delivering not defeat, but a longer road to fragile freedom, where the cost of hesitation proved higher than the price of courage. Thank you for exploring this grim timeline where the beaches held, and the world paid dearly for it. What other decisive days teetered on weather, luck, or resolve, ready to rewrite our shared story?